Well, good afternoon, Celebration Spiritual Center family. How are we feeling? How are we being? It feels good in here. Yes, yes. I feel the release. It's already happening. It's already happening, and we're just going to take that a little bit further. Now, before we get too deep into the message, I first want to take a moment to acknowledge our brothers and sisters in Santa Fe, Texas. Those students of Santa Fe High School, the faculty, the families, the parents, the community. Not only are our love and prayers with you, but our inspired action is with you. We, of course, here at this center, we are advocates. We here at this center are not afraid to march. We here at this center are not afraid to call for reform in our laws. And we are also not afraid to recognize that we live from this deep New Thought axiom, let there be peace on earth and let it begin with me. And so we do not wait for anyone else to change if we are not willing to make the shifts, the changes that are needed within ourselves in order to create the beloved community that we desire. Yes, yes? Thank you again, Julia, for being here. We appreciate you. And I also want to say thank you to First Lady Shirlane McCray and Mayor de Blasio for their just incredibly inspired leadership, and it's been so wonderful and amazing to watch how Mental Health Weekend and Thrive NYC has continued to grow, and we are so honored and happy to be a part of this. So, I always like to take us back to understand where we've been as we have this series, and so in week one, we started with the biology of choice, recognizing as unfortunately, our dear brother Kanye West said that slavery was a choice, and not only for our ancestors, but even today, we must recognize the biology of choice, that actually, although from the outside looking in, it feels like someone has a choice to do something differently, when you're dealing with trauma, you don't have choice. And so I said it then, I'll say it again, and many of you have seen the article that came out this week. It was completely irresponsible and unloving what he said, right? Because it didn't take this into perspective. And so we recognize that in order to actually get to this place of choice, there's a healing that has to happen. And we talked about some ways that we can use various techniques of meditation and other techniques that allow us to get to this place to access the subconscious mind, that 95%, so that then we can start to change our thoughts and our habits and actually access, as I always quote Bob Roth here, the CEO of the mind, our frontal cortex. And so when we're in trauma, when we're stressed out, we're living in the fight or flight place, we don't have access to the CEO. So the organization, the company is a little in disarray. And so please go back to that message. We shared a lot there. Last week, let's go to the other side. As we talked about choice in the first week, in the second week, we want to talk about change, that we recognize we want to make a change in our lives, and we come to the river of change, but then what is required? And there are three things: acceptance, belief, and surrender are what are required that will then allow us and support us in moving across the river of change as we are creating literally, chemically, biologically, and genetically a new identity. That's the only reason it doesn't feel good when we're trying to make a choice. It could be even something as small as choosing to save money where you're not really saving right now, and you start out well, initially, and then you get back into your old pattern. And it's because biologically your body is living in the past to those old choices, and so you need the chemicals from your brain to continue to signal to yourself that which feels good or really familiar. And so in creating the new identity, it's unknown, it feels unfamiliar, and so our brain and our body are not working together. But your brain is what's in control, right? And so we have this awesome opportunity to then live from this new thought, implant the new thoughts, and then remind our body that the mind is the mind and the body is not the mind. So there's something I do every day. When I leave the house, I walk outside, I have my headphones on, and I say, hello breeze, hello trees, hello Brooklyn. It's so good to be alive. It's so good to be loved and loving. Hello clouds, hello sun, hello gray clouds, hello blue sky, right? Hello flowers. I love to do that. And I talk to the trees as I'm walking up the block. And this week, as I was doing that, I was just mesmerized because, we've had so much rain this week, and if you noticed, like the deep, deep green of the leaves, right? And I said, look at y'all. Because I realized, it was only a few weeks ago that they were barren and skinny looking, and, and they were even snow covered not too long ago, right? We had this lake. And I said, look at y'all just thriving and just green and beautiful. And, I felt like I was almost in a forest or a jungle because it was just so magnificent, right? And as I thought about that, I said, wow, these trees, they just have an impulse to thrive. In spite of what may have happened again, we had a late winter and late snow and all of these things, but the trees have a knowingness, an impulse to thrive, to display these brand new leaves, new clothes, right? And these bright, bright, deep colors and absorbing the water and just being magnificent. And as I thought about that, I said, well, if they have this impulse to thrive, and what about us? Right? Because what I understand first, it's like it's a part of their DNA, and we know it is. And so if it's a part of their DNA, this divine, this holy impulse within them to thrive, well, then I recognize something beautiful that science teaches us about DNA. That from the level and perspective of DNA compared to a tree, we are more alike than we are different. All living things come from a common ancestor. For example, and this is a wonderful one, I love this, that approximately 60% of our DNA is the same as a banana or a banana tree. We are more alike than we are different. And so we can all see, I see you all, you're smiling, you laugh, you've seen the trees and you understand that they have this impulse to thrive, but if this is the case, then why don't human beings seem to thrive just as easily and effortlessly as the trees do? If this is the case, why does it seem that some people are more capable of thriving than others? If this is the case, why does it appear that the holy impulse skips over some of us? It overlooks others of us while seemingly gives others a double or even a triple portion of this holy impulse to thrive. Well, what I know to be true, and I echo our dear brother Ernest Holmes in The Science of Mind, the universe or God or source doesn't play favorites. And so if that is true, then there must be a way for each and every one of us as humans, as we share this same DNA and this same common ancestry with the trees, there must be a way for us to activate the innate holy impulse to thrive. And so we're going to talk about how do we access that. And the first place that we must go to is the Adam and Eve allegory. And I say allegory because it's not a literal story. I say allegory because Adam and Eve actually never walked the earth. But it is a beautiful story, symbolic story that's designed to teach us a few things. Now, many of you, you've been listening to me for a while, so you know this, but I want to make sure that I share it. If we look in the book of Genesis, there are actually two creation stories. In the first chapter, we have the story that we're familiar with. It's the 7 days of creation. God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God spoke, and then there was water, and God spoke. And so the 7 days, and then near the end, God said, let us make mankind, humankind, in our likeness and image. God made them male and female and said, it is good, and commanded them to be fruitful and multiply. And God looked upon all that God created and said, it is good. And rested on the seventh day. End of story. That's the first creation story. Now, in the second chapter, we get this second creation story. One of the ways we know that it's a second separate story is because even the order of creation is different, right? So we reckon, and we could go a little deeper. They come from two different traditions, and a lot of these traditions were merged together, and so that's why we have two stories. But if we look in the second story, there was something interesting that happened. This is where we get the commandment about the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. In Genesis 2:16, we read, and the Lord God commanded the man, or Adam, you may freely eat of every tree in the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it, you shall die. And that's a very truthful statement. If we eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, we will die. Now, it doesn't mean necessarily our physical death, but what is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? It is the tree of duality. It is the tree of separation. It is the tree of opposites. It's the tree of the past and the future, which means you ain't in the now. And when you're not in the present moment, then what happens? That's when the things that we don't want or we don't like show up in our lives. If we're living in this idea of separation, that because my skin color is different than your skin color, then we die as a community. Again, not a physical death, but recognizing that we're not thriving. And so this was the deeper, wonderful, mystical understanding that happened. And so what goes on? Of course, we know there's the serpent and the apple and all of that wonderful stuff happens, right? And so because they ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, Adam and Eve experienced separation. All of a sudden, they had to hide from each other, and then they had to hide from God. And God says, because you believe that there's something wrong with you, you are now banished from Eden. You are now banished from this place that is the pure symbolism of thriving. That's all Eden was a place to thrive, was a place to live, a place to be happy, a place that you would never die. Right? It was the epitome of thriving. But because they believed something different, they no longer could stay in this place of thriving, or this place we call Eden, and they were cursed. And part of the cursing here from God, we read, "Cursed is the ground because of you. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face," or the sweat of your brow, if you're reading the King James, "you shall eat bread until you return to the ground." We also know that Eve was cursed, that then childbirth would become painful. Now, again, this was an allegory. We understand that if we look back at ancient stories and creation stories, these stories were trying to tell us why our current conditions are the way that they are, right? And so in this ancient story, this was a belief amongst this group of people that this was the reason why women experience pain during childbirth, that this is the reason why we must toil by the sweat of our brow and work hard in order to get anything that we want. This is the opposite of thriving, yes, yes? And so we recognize then that if we eat of the knowledge of the tree of good and evil, we cannot thrive. We're going to live in work. We're going to live in toil. We're going to live in struggle. We're going to live in hustle. But there's something very deep and something interesting that my attention was brought back to. Pastor Yolanda and I were having a conversation about this idea, and I'm so happy to bring this idea to you. One of our pioneers within the New Thought movement, as many of you know, and for those that don't know, the New Thought movement really was established in the late 19th century. We have Phineas Parkhurst Quimby, who is considered the father of the movement. Emma Curtis Hopkins is considered the mother of the movement. But in between there was a woman by the name of Mary Baker Eddy, who studied with Phineas Parkhurst Quimby. She experienced a miraculous healing using her mind, using thought and thought alone, not using conventional medicine. After Parkhurst Quimby died, Mary Baker Eddy, she was injured again and was able to heal herself. She fell and was able to heal herself, and she became the founder of Christian Science. And there's something interesting that she teaches that's one of the foundational ideas within Christian Science, which again is part of the New Thought movement. Because we read this story about Adam in the second creation, and we have the commandment that God gave to not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And then God says, it's not good for man to be alone, for Adam to be alone. And so that's when God creates the animals. And then after that, then God still realizes that Adam needs a partner. And so what happens? God puts Adam to sleep, right? And then takes the rib, and Eve is created, right? Y'all know that story, right? Well, what's interesting is that Mary Baker Eddy teaches something. Adam never woke up. If you look at the text, nowhere does it say that Adam woke up. And what she teaches us then is that she talks about this Adam dream, that really what is required for each and every one of us to do is to wake up from this Adam dream. Because you see, when Adam was asleep, that's then when the first separation created of Adam and Eve being separate and different. While he was asleep, Adam and Eve ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They ate of separation. He moved out of the now and moved into the past and the future. He moved into separation. He moved into duality. He moved into fear. He moved into doubt and worry. All of this happened while he was asleep. And so the opportunity is for us to wake up. Now, Mary Baker Eddy writes this. She was writing this in the late 1890s. The parent of all human discord was the Adam dream, the deep sleep in which originated the delusion that life and intelligence proceeded from and passed into matter. Man or mankind or humankind is the offspring of spirit. The beautiful, good, and pure constitute our ancestry. And if you recall in week 1, I said that to be asleep means to live in the past, but to stay woke means to live in the now. So we recognize then that one of the ways in order for us to thrive, in order for us to tap into this holy impulse that is within us to thrive, we got to wake up from this dream. We have to wake up from this dream of separation. We have to wake up from this dream of otherness. We have to wake up from this dream of not living in the now. We have to wake up from this dream of living in the past or living in the future and completely live in the now. That's how we stay woke. So that is one of the first things that we must do if we want to thrive, to wake up from this Adam dream. Now, as we also talked about in week 1, we talked about meditation. We talked about this idea that we actually have the ability and capacity to shift our brain waves into a state that makes us more receptive to receive new ideas. And those brainwave states, we have to be in an alpha brainwave state or we have to be in theta, right? And while that sounds, fantastic or like, well, how can I do that? It's actually really easy, right? And we have wonderful ways to do that. For many of you and many of us, we are practitioners of transcendental meditation. That's what TM does. By practicing transcendental meditation, it is a meditation that is designed to release stress from our body and then allow our bodies to do what it does naturally, heal itself, right? And what's interesting is when you're in TM, in that 20 minutes twice a day, your brain waves are alpha 1 brain waves, right? Beautiful. As we have also been quoting from and looking at You Are the Placebo by Dr. Joe Dispenza, he shares a beautiful meditation that you can use for yourself or you can purchase his meditations. It does the same thing. It's designed to take you into a theta brainwave state so that then you can begin to impress upon your subconscious, that 95%. You can impress upon that part of your brain these new ideas of who you want to be or what you want to do or what you want to have. I also shared that float therapy is a wonderful thing. It's something that I love to do. Does the same thing. It's a beautiful process. And then finally, I also talked about you can use subliminal recordings, and I recommend Subliminal Guru to do that. Now, in You Are the Placebo, Dr. Joe Dispenza says something interesting about meditation. He says that if we can synthesize it into a nice, quick definition, to meditate means to become familiar with. Now, this is interesting as we're talking about developing these new ideas, that in order to remove the program of the Adam dream and to install a new thought, we must become familiar with the unknown. We must actually go to the unknown. But when I talk about this unknown, what we're really talking about is God itself. Now, this takes us into physics a little bit, into the realm of quantum physics, because what we know now through physics is that all life, all matter, and all physical laws, principles, can be reduced down to what's known as the unified field theory. That everything comes from one source. Now, we speak that. That's what we say, that all things come from God. All things come from this mind, this presence, this beauty, this love that we call God. Everything emanates from that. And science corroborates that. It's called the unified field theory. Everything can be reduced down to this place called the unified field where everything comes from. And what's interesting, there's a mathematical equation. In Scripture, we have this word Yahweh. And one of the definitions of Yahweh is the self-existing one, which means that then it exists and can create, but yet never diminishes itself. And there's a equation, a mathematical equation that corroborates that the unified field, it actually gives of itself and gives back to itself, so it's never diminished. So this is why all of us exist as individual expressions of this thing we call God, all life, all matter, all galaxies, all stars, all planets, all moons, all suns exist, and yet this thing or this field that we call God is actually not diminished. It's still unified, whole, and eternal. And so this is truly the unknown that we must go to. Now, Joe Dispenza writes this. In order to access the unlimited potential that's waiting for you in the quantum field, you have to forget about the known, your body, your face, your gender, your race, your profession, and even your concept of what you have to do today, so that you can remain for a while in the unknown, where you are nobody, no one, no thing, and no place, and in no time. You have to become pure consciousness, nothing but a thought or an awareness that you're aware in a void of potentials, so that your brain can recalibrate. Now, this happens a couple ways. Now, one, have you ever experienced this in meditation where you thought you were meditating for 5 minutes and it was actually 10 or 15? You entered the place of no body, no one, no thing, no place, no time. And that's transcendence. Now, at the same time, you don't have to be in meditation. Have you ever been doing something that you loved, doing something that you enjoyed, and you thought you were only doing it for about a half hour, and it was actually an hour or an hour and 45 minutes? That's called transcendence. You had entered the place of no body, no one, no thing, no place, no time. This is important to note because that means that everybody has the ability to access this place that we're talking about. You don't have to be some guru on a mountain with a long beard and white robes. You don't have to read and study every scripture that exists. You don't even have to light incense. Important to know. And so one thing that came to me, I was sitting in meditation and thinking about this idea. Now, one of the things that we do as we understand, and thank God we live in this wonderful time in life where we all have a good sense of psychology in different ways, right? Because the work of Freud and the work of Carl Jung has become partially pop culture in many ways. So we can self-diagnose and we can kind of speak certain things out. And that's a good thing, right? Now, one of the ways this happens is we recognize that there's a root to sometimes our behavior, right? So there may be things that we're doing or a habit that we're in or a choice that we're in, and we want to know, well, something must have happened to me when I was a child, right? And many times we get to that place. We understand, well, this happened, right? I experienced some trauma as a child, or I experienced some unwanted thing, or, I was promised things and I never received it. So that's why I don't trust my partners and I don't trust my lovers now, because I felt that I couldn't trust my parents. So if I can't do it for myself, then I don't want to be involved with anybody else. Yes, we understand those things, right? And then what happens is we want to get to the bottom of it, and we think we've gotten to the bottom of it. We go on through life, and then something else shows up. And it brings us back to that same thing. And what do we say? I thought I had already healed that. I thought I had already dealt with that, right? Now, what I love in the teachings of Abraham always says, you'll never get to the bottom of it. Now, why is that? It's because of the way the law of attraction works. Because the way the law of attraction works is that when we think a thought, the universe then brings to us any thought that matches that over and over again. So as long as you're focusing on this traumatic experience, you're going to continue to bring back other thoughts and other reasons why that thing existed, or why you're wrong, or why you're bad, or why you're stuck in this pattern, as long as you put your attention on it. So we got to actually let it go, right? This is what forgiveness helps us do. But I understood something even more profound as it relates to this idea of becoming nobody, no one, no thing, going into consciousness, going into this unified field. There is a root that we have to get to. See, we all know that. We're like, I want to get to the root of it, because if I get to the root of it, I can heal it. I want to get to the root. If I can get to the root, I can heal it. I want to get to the root. I know if I get to the root, I know this thing will be healed and I can be let go. But we're going to the wrong root. Because you see, through this meditative process, as we go to the unified field, the root of all life, we go to that root and we recognize that there is no problem. As Pastor Yolanda said last week, nobody doesn't have a problem. We go to the place of nobody. No time, no one, no thing. All of a sudden, you're not your story anymore. All of a sudden, you're not that experience anymore. And then what happens again, and we understand this can be measured. It is measured. That when we go to that place, and as Joe Dispenza says, we allow our brains to recalibrate, Our body has a natural, innate sense, impulse to thrive. So when you go to that place, now you're nobody, no one, no thing, and no time, and no place. And now what happens is your body can now begin to activate its innate sense of healing. All of a sudden, your blood pressure starts to go down. All of a sudden, your cholesterol is lowered. All of a sudden, you're no longer at risk for heart disease. This is fact. But this is why. Because you've gone to the source to now heal the story. So many people, of course, people of color, we have this story that heart disease is something that happens to black folk. That's not true. What's really going on, the stress is causing the heart disease. Because if we're living in a traumatic experience and you feel like the outside world is against you, then your body is constantly pumping cortisol and adrenaline over and over again. And so by the time you're 21, you have the heart of a 40, 50, or 60-year-old. That's all that's happening. But we recognize through meditation, what do? Your cortisol levels drop even lower than the level that they drop when you're asleep. And then it turns on. It activates your body's natural ability to heal itself. So this thought process, this thinking, it took me a little deeper. Because we're talking about waking up from this Adam dream, and we're talking about tapping into this place, this unified field where all knowledge, all love is, where everything comes from, and we can heal. We can begin to recalibrate our brains, and by recalibrating our brains, we then send new signals to our bodies to heal. And so it took me to Corinthians, Paul's letter to the Corinthians, chapter 13. It's very familiar. Y'all know it. It's that love verse, right? Love is patient. Love is kind. We sing the song, Love is the More Excellent Way, that's based on this verse, or this chapter, rather. And there's something that Paul says here that I think points us back to this deeper truth that we're dealing with. Now, starting at verse 8, he writes, or ends that piece about talking about love, and he says, love never ends. Now, we also find this same text in the Essene Gospel of Peace, in the words, in the mouth of Jesus. And in that translation, it says, love never exhausts itself. I love that again because you see the parallels. As we just said that God or Yahweh, this source is self-existing, never exhausts itself. We have the same translation about love. Love never exhausts itself. But then he writes, but as for prophecies, they will come to an end. And as for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will come to an end. For we know only in part, and we prophesy only in part. But when the complete comes, the partial will come to an end. And as I thought about that, I said, well, wait, why would knowledge end? Like, knowledge is a good thing, right? We want to know things. But if we go back to this original allegory, we just talked about the problem with knowledge. See, when we get too hung up on knowledge, we're actually living in the Adam dream because knowledge creates separation. Knowledge, in order for us to know something, it has to be outside of us. We have to look at it. We have to, use our five senses to then separate ourselves from it, to then understand it, but then we never unify back with it. And so it's interesting. Knowledge must cease. Love never ends. Love never exhausts itself, but knowledge actually must cease. Even prophecies, this preaching and teaching and talking that I'm doing, it can't compare to the experience. This is why Pastor Yolanda says it every week. We have the meditation experience. We can talk about God. You can talk about spirituality. You can know a lot. You can read lots of scriptures. You can read lots of books. But if you have not experienced this thing, you really don't know it. And so we recognize that all of that must come to an end. But then he says, but when the complete comes, the partial will come to an end. And I believe that completion is this idea of the unification that we're talking about. Because now you're back into wholeness. Now you're back into completion. You've faded back into the one. And so then he goes on, for now we see in a mirror dimly. You might know the other translation, for now we look in a glass darkly. But then we will see face to face. Now I know only in part, but then I will know fully, even as I have been fully known. When we allow ourselves to access this place, no longer are you just knowing in part or having this idea about God. You may have heard the story of, if you have a bunch of men, there's an elephant, and you have a bunch of blindfolded men around the elephant, and describe the elephant. One man is touching the trunk. So they're like, this is what the elephant is, the trunk. The other person's holding the tail, and they're describing the tail, saying, this is what the elephant is. Another one is holding the foot. This is what the elephant is. Because from their perspective, that's all it is. That's knowing in part. That's why we have all these different religions, all these different theologies, all of these different ways of being, because all of us are trying to describe this elephant, describe God from our limited, small vantage point. But we recognize that we have the access to go to the source, and then we will know fully, even as we have been fully known. And he ends, and now faith, hope, and love abide, these three, and the greatest of these is love. And so it may seem cliche, but we have to know love in order to thrive. Now, I love in A Course of Love, which is basically the sequel to A Course in Miracles in some ways. A Course in Miracles is about us changing our thoughts. It's a thought system that we're developing. And what A Course of Love recognizes is that as we have used our minds and moved to that place to think new thoughts, now we have to unite our mind with our heart. And so A Course of Love is inviting us to do that. And so one of the tenets of A Course of Love is I dedicate all thoughts to union. And what it says in the text is interesting. Union is impossible without God. God is union. Is this not like saying God is love? Love is impossible without union. The same is true of relationship. God creates all relationship. When you think of relationship, you think of one relationship and then another. The one you share with this friend or that, with husband or wife, with child or employer or parent. In thinking in these specific terms, you lost the meaning of the holy relationship. Relationship itself is holy. So we recognize then that in order to thrive, we have to live in love, we have to live in union, we have to live in connection with this thing that we call God. For love is impossible without union. And meditation is what allows us to come into union, to come into this connection. And we recognize this takes us back to the beginning, because eating of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil created separation. But love is union. So then how do we do that? We must unite with God through our thoughts. But what does that mean? That means that holding thoughts of gratitude, holding thoughts of joy, holding thoughts of laughter, kindness, enthusiasm, inspiration, awe, that's what keeps us connected to God, keeps us connected to our source. But on the other hand, if we're complaining, if we're in worry, if we're in fear, gossip, anger, stressed out, it disconnects us. And what's beautiful is, again, the way the science and medicine corroborates this. When we're in joy, when we're in love, when we're in laughter, it turns on the genes within us that promote health and healing and actually boost our immune system. That's quantifiable and verifiable. And it's also quantifiable and verifiable that when we move into complaining, there was a study that was done, Dr. Joe Dispenza, he talks about this or writes about this in You Are the Placebo, where they took couples and they invited them to have an argument, right? To pick something from the past that was a frustrating thing that maybe they had gotten over, but in this experiment, they had one group that brought that argument back up, and they had the control group that just spoke nice, loving things to each other. And even though it was something from the past, they got into that argument, and then they measured their genetic identity. And what they found is that the genes that promoted dis-ease and sickness began to turn on as a result of them having an argument from the past. And similarly, there are countless studies now of those that taking cancer patients and those that are dealing with diabetes, watching a comedy for an hour. It turns on the genes that promote wellness and well-being. And so I think that's beautiful and wonderful, because we're not talking about something, as I said earlier, this idea of we have to be some guru with a long beard, living in a mountain or shut away from the world. Because, one of the things we say is in living, we activate God. We believe that as spiritual people, we should be living out in the world fully, openly, and thriving. And we recognize the way to do that effectively is gratitude. So simple. 3 things you're grateful for in the morning or in the evening. To focus on those things that bring you joy, to find ways to laugh. which is why, there's certain movies, certain TV shows I just don't watch. Not because they're bad, but they don't promote the laughter and joy that I'm seeking to stay in so that I can thrive. Kindness. I saw a beautiful thing. I was at Next Level Burger at Whole Foods. And I'm sitting there in the window, and, people watching, they're going by. And this woman walks by and drops some money. And another woman is walking in the other way and sees it. And I watched her chase her all the way down, give her her money, and then she walks back, and I just said, thumbs up, and she smiled, and we had a little moment, right? And so not only did I she experienced the good of that kindness and the woman getting her money back, but I got to experience it, and then we had an exchange, and my vibration lifted. I know that my cells laughed within me, right? Enthusiasm, inspiration, awe. Take some time to just go outside and look up at the sky and realize that you're one with this magnificent universe, this magnificent earth that is our home. You're one with it. Or do like I do and talk to the trees. But know that there is a holy impulse within you, a holy impulse to thrive. But in order to thrive, we have to wake up from the Adam dream. We have to throw out the old programs and the old stories, and we must connect and unite with thoughts that promote healing, thoughts that promote wellness, and thoughts that promote well-being. So my sisters, my brothers, thrive. My sisters, my brothers, thrive, thrive, thrive. With that, I say amen, amen. Ashe. And so it is. And so it is.